When I was 6 years old, I once saw a magnificent picture in a book on the virgin forest called Stories of Life. It was a boa constrictor that had swallowed a wild beast. Here is a copy of the drawing. It was written in the book, "Boa constrictors swallow their whole prey without chewing. Then they cannot move, and they sleep during the 6 months of their digestion." I then thought a lot about the adventures of the jungle, and in turn succeeded, with a colored pencil, in drawing my very first drawing. It was like this. I showed my masterpiece to the grown-ups and asked them if my drawing frightened them. They said, "Why would a hat be scary?" My drawing was not of a hat. It was a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. I then drew the inside of the boa constrictor so that the grown-ups could understand. They always required more explanation. My second drawing was like this. The grown-ups advised me to leave aside the drawings of boa constrictors from the outside or the inside and to interest myself instead in geography, history, calculation, and grammar. Thus, at the age of 6, I abandoned a magnificent career as a painter. I had been discouraged by the failure of my first drawing and my second drawing. Grown-ups never understand anything on their own, and it is tiring for children to always have to give them explanations. So I had to choose another profession. I learned to fly planes. I flew all over the world. And geography, that's right, served me well. I knew how to recognize, at first glance, China or Arizona. It is useful if you have gone astray during the night. I have had, in the course of my life, a lot of contact with many serious people. I have lived among the grown-ups. I saw them up close. It did not really improve my opinion of them. When I met one that seemed to me a little lucid, I had them experience my drawing number 1, which I had preserved. I wanted to know if they could come to a real understanding, but they always replied, "It's a hat." After that, I spoke to them neither of boa constrictors, nor of virgin forests, nor of stars. I put myself within their reach. I talked about bridge, golf, politics, and ties, and the grown-ups were glad to know such a reasonable man. So I lived alone, with no one to talk to, until a breakdown in the Sahara Desert 6 years ago. Something had broken in my engine, and since I had neither a mechanic nor a passenger with me, I prepared to try by myself to make a difficult reprieve. It was a matter of life and death. I had hardly any water to drink for a week. The first night, I fell asleep on the sand 1,000 miles from any inhabited land. I was much more isolated than a castaway on a raft in the middle of the ocean. Then you imagine my surprise at dawn, when a funny little voice woke me up. She said, "Please draw me a sheep. Hein, draw me a sheep. Draw me a—" I jumped on my feet as if I had been struck by lightning. I rubbed my eyes well. I watched, and I saw a very extraordinary little man who looked at me gravely. This is the best portrait I later managed to make of him. But my drawing, of course, is much less ravishing than the model. It is not my fault. I had been discouraged in my career as a painter by the grown-ups at the age of 6, and I had learned nothing to draw except closed boas and open boas. I looked at this apparition with eyes full of astonishment. Do not forget that I was 1,000 miles from any inhabited region. Now my little fellow seemed to me neither astray, nor dead of fatigue, nor dead of hunger, nor death of thirst, nor dead of fear. He had not the appearance of a child lost in the middle of the desert 1,000 miles from any inhabited region. When I finally succeeded in speaking, I said to him, "What are you doing here?" And he repeated to me, very gently as a very serious thing, "Please draw me a sheep." When the mystery is too impressive, we do not dare to disobey. As absurd as it seemed to me, 1,000 miles from all inhabited places and in danger of death, I took out of my pocket a sheet of paper and a pen. But I remembered that I had studied geography, history, calculation, and grammar, and I told the little fellow, with a little bad humor, that I did not know how to draw. He replied, "It does not matter. Draw me a sheep." As I had never drawn a sheep, I thought of him as one of the only 2 drawings of which I was capable, that of the boa closed. and I was astounded to hear the little fellow reply, "No, no, I do not want an elephant in a boa. A boa is very dangerous, and an elephant is very cumbersome. My place is tight. I need a sheep. Draw me a sheep." I drew. Then he looked attentively, then, "No, that one is already very ill. Do another one." I drew. He looked attentively, then, "No, that one is already very ill. Do another one." I drew. My friend smiled gently, indulgently. "You see, it's not a sheep, it's a ram. He has horns." So I still refused my drawing, but he was refused, like the preceding ones. "This one is too old. I want a long-lived sheep." Then, for lack of patience, as I was anxious to begin the dismantling of my engine, I scribbled this drawing. Then I threw, "That's the box. The sheep you want is in it." But I was much surprised to see the face of my young judge illuminated. "That's exactly how I wanted it." "Do you think that sheep are to be found in this country?" "Why?" "Because at home it's very small. Surely that will suffice. I gave you a tiny sheep." He leaned his head toward the drawing. "Not so small as that." He fell asleep. And so I made the acquaintance of the little prince. It took me a long time to understand where he came from. The little prince, who asked me many questions, never seemed to hear mine. These are words spoken by chance that little by little have revealed all to me. So when he saw my plane for the first time, "I will not draw my plane, it is a drawing too complicated for me," he asked me, "What is that thing?" "It's not a thing. It flies. It's a plane. This is my plane." And I was proud to tell him I was flying. Then he exclaimed, "How? You have fallen from heaven." "Yes," I said modestly. "Ah, now that's funny." And the little prince had a very pretty burst of laughter, which irritated me very much. I wished to take my misfortunes seriously. Then he added, "Then you too come from heaven." "What planet are you from?" I caught a glimpse in the mystery of his presence, and I suddenly questioned, "So you're from another planet?" But he did not answer me. He nodded softly as he looked at my plane. "It's true that you cannot come very far from it." And he sank into a reverie that lasted for a long time. Then, taking my sheep out of his pocket, he plunged into the contemplation of his treasure. You can imagine how intrigued I was by this half-confidence about the other planets. I therefore endeavored to learn more. "Where do you come from, my little fellow?" "Where is at home?" "Where do you want to take my sheep?" He replied after a meditative silence, "Of course. And if you are kind, I will also give you a rope to tie it up during the day, and a picket." The proposal seemed to shock the little prince. "Attach it." What a funny idea. "But if you do not tie him, he'll go anywhere, and he'll get lost." And my friend burst into laughter again. "But where do you want him to go?" "Anywhere. Right in front of him." Then the little prince gravely remarked, "It does not matter. It's so small at home." And with a little melancholy, perhaps, he added, "Straight ahead, you cannot go far." I had learned a second very important thing, that its original planet was scarcely larger than a house. It could not surprise me much. I knew that besides the big planets like the Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, which have been given names, there are hundreds of others that are sometimes so small that it is very hard for them to see the telescope. When an astronomer discovers one of them, he names it as a number. He calls it, for example, the asteroid 325. I have serious reasons to believe that the planet from which the little prince came is the asteroid B 612. This asteroid was seen only once in 1909 by a Turkish astronomer in the telescope. He had then made a great demonstration of his discovery at an international astronomy congress. But nobody believed him because of his costume. Big people are like that. Fortunately for the reputation of the asteroid B 612, a Turkish dictator imposed on his people under penalty of death to dress European. The astronomer resumed his demonstration in 1920 in a very elegant dress, and this time everyone was of his opinion. If I have told you these details about the asteroid B612, and if I have given you its number, it is because of the big people. Big people like the numbers. When you tell them about a new friend, they never question you about the basics. They never tell you what is the sound of his voice. What games does he prefer? Does he collect butterflies? They ask, how old is he? How many brothers? How much does he weigh? How much does his father earn? Then they only think they know him. If you say to the grown-ups, I saw a beautiful pink brick house with geraniums on the windows and doves on the roof, they cannot imagine this house. We must say to them, I have seen a house of 100,000 francs. Then they cried, how pretty it is. So if you say to them, the proof that the little prince existed is that he was delightful, that he laughed, and that he wanted a sheep. When you want a sheep, it is proof that you exist. They will shrug their shoulders and treat you as a child. But if you tell them the planet where it came from is asteroid B612, then they will be convinced, and they will leave you alone with their questions. They're like that. We must not blame them. Children should be very lenient towards adults. But of course, we who understand life, we make fun of the numbers. I would have liked to start this story like fairy tales. I would have liked to say, once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet hardly larger than himself, and who needed a friend. For those who understand life, it would have seemed much more true, because I do not like to read my book lightly. I feel so sorry to recount these memories. It's 6 years since my friend went away with his sheep. If I try to describe it here, it is so as not to forget it. It's sad to forget a friend. Not everyone has had a friend, and I can become like the grown-ups who are interested only in numbers. So that's why I bought a box of colors and pencils. It's hard to go back to drawing at my age when no other attempt has ever been made than that of a closed boa and that of an open boa at the age of 6. I will try, of course, to make portraits as resembling as possible, but I'm not quite sure I'm going to succeed. One drawing goes, and the other does not look any more. I make some errors, also on the size. Here the little prince is too big. There he is too small. I also hesitate about the color of his costume. Then I fumbled, like this and that, as best I could. At last I shall be mistaken about certain more important details, but that will have to be forgiven. My friend never gave an explanation. He thought I might be like him. But unfortunately, I do not know how to see the sheep through the crates. I may be a bit like grown-ups. I must have got older,